Sometimes a woman walks into a courtroom and the whole room goes quiet, not because she is loud, not because she is angry, but because the grief on her face is so heavy that every single person in that room can feel it pressing down on their own chest. Margaret Ellen Dorsey walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom on September 15th carrying that kind of grief. She had buried her husband the day before, and someone had made sure she got a parking ticket while she was doing it. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now. We tell stories about real people facing moments that would break most of us. Margaret's story is one of those moments. You are going to want to be here for all of it. Subscribe and stay with us. Margaret Ellen Dorsey was 67 years old. She had worked the same checkout lane at a grocery store on Broad Street in Providence, Rhode Island for 22 years. She wore the same white sneakers to work every single day, the ones with the left sole held together by a thin strip of black electrical tape. She drove a 2004 Ford pickup truck, green, with a small crack running along the bottom of the windshield on the passenger side. She never had the money to fix it. She and her husband, Robert, had talked about fixing it every summer for the last 4 years. They never got around to it. Robert James Dorsey had been sick for 14 months before he passed, pancreatic cancer. He was 69 years old. He had been a school bus driver for 31 years. He knew the names of every child on his route. He kept a small notebook in his front shirt pocket where he wrote down birthdays so he could wish every single kid a happy birthday on their special day. Margaret found that notebook in his nightstand after he died. There were over 200 names in it. She held it against her chest and cried for a long time. Their neighborhood on Elmwood Avenue had changed over the last decade. New money had moved in, big houses with freshly painted iron fences, new cars in the driveways every other year. The Dorsey home was the oldest on the block. The paint was a little faded. The garden was a little overgrown because Robert had been too sick to tend to it, and Margaret had been too exhausted caring for him to tend to it herself. But it was their home. They had raised 2 children there. They had 38 years of memories inside those walls. The man who lived 3 houses down was not the kind of neighbor who brought over food when someone was sick. Victor H. Caldwell III had moved to Elmwood Avenue 6 years ago. He was 44 years old. He ran a private investment firm downtown. He drove a black Porsche Cayenne with tinted windows. He wore a Rolex Submariner on his left wrist, and he made sure you noticed it when he shook your hand. He had complained to the city 3 times in 2 years about the appearance of the Dorsey home. He had written letters. He had made phone calls. He had told his wife in front of his own lawn crew that the neighborhood would be better off if people like the Dorseys either fixed their house or sold it. Victor Caldwell was the kind of man who believed that his comfort was more important than other people's pain. What happened on September 14th proved that. Robert Dorsey's funeral was held on September 13th, a Thursday, at St. Michael's Church on Academy Avenue. The service lasted just over 2 hours. Afterward, friends and family came back to the house on Elmwood Avenue to share food and memories. Cars lined both sides of the street. Margaret's truck was parked directly in front of Victor Caldwell's property, not blocking his driveway, not blocking his mailbox, parked legally on a public street. Just parked there like every other car belonging to every other mourner who had come to honor a man who had spent his whole life serving others. Victor Caldwell stepped outside at 4:45 in the afternoon, looked at the line of cars, and called the parking enforcement office. He did not knock on Margaret's door. He did not ask anyone to move their vehicle. He did not say a single word to a single human being who was inside that house grieving. He made a phone call. He said, and these are his exact words as recorded in the parking enforcement log, "There is an illegal gathering on my street and multiple vehicles are creating a nuisance. I want them cited immediately." The officer who arrived did his job. He wrote tickets. Most of the cars were gone by the time he got there. But Margaret's truck was still parked there because Margaret was still inside her house, still receiving the last few guests, still holding her daughter's hand and crying. The ticket was placed under the windshield wiper of Robert Dorsey's wife's truck at 5:32 p.m. on September 13th, the same day she buried him. She did not find it until the next morning when she went outside to get the newspaper. The fine was $85. Now, before we go any further, I have to stop and ask you something. This channel exists because of people like you who believe that justice matters. We cover real stories, real courtrooms, real moments where the system either breaks people or lifts them up. If you have been watching for a while and you have not subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. Every week we bring you a new story that reminds us why fighting for fairness is never a waste of time. We have over 1,000 stories waiting to be told, and we need you here to hear them. This is more than a channel. This is a record of what justice looks like when it works and what it looks like when it does not. Subscribe now and be part of that record. Margaret did not have $85 she could easily spare. With Robert gone, her grocery store income was the only income. She had spent most of her savings on his medical bills over the last year. She had a stack of unopened envelopes on the kitchen table that she had not been able to face yet. She considered just paying the ticket and moving on. She almost did. But her daughter Denise looked at that ticket and said, "Mama, you don't owe these people anything. Fight it." So Margaret put on her good coat, the navy blue one she had worn to Robert's funeral just the day before, and she drove to Providence Municipal Court. When the case was called, Margaret Ellen Dorsey walked to the front of the courtroom slowly. She was small. She moved carefully, like someone who was still not entirely sure her legs were going to hold her up. She wore the navy blue coat. Underneath it was a gray dress. On her lapel she had pinned a small photograph, just the size of a quarter, of herself and Robert at their daughter's wedding 11 years ago. Her white sneakers, the ones with the taped sole, squeaked faintly on the courtroom floor as she walked. She held a small folder with her documents. Her hands were shaking. Victor Caldwell sat in the gallery. He had been notified that the ticket was being contested. He had come in person. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Margaret made in a month. He had his lawyer with him, a man in a blue tie who looked like he had never lost a case and knew it. Caldwell sat back in the gallery with his arms crossed and a look on his face that said he could not believe he had to be here for this. Judge Frank Caprio looked at Margaret when she approached. He looked at her coat. He looked at her hands. He asked her, in his gentle way, to tell him what happened. And Margaret Ellen Dorsey took a slow, steady breath, and she told him. She told him about Robert, about the 31 years on the school bus and the little notebook with the birthdays. She told him about the cancer and the 14 months and the last night when she held his hand until he stopped breathing. She told him about the funeral on Thursday and the people who came to the house and the cars parked on the street. She told him she found the ticket Friday morning when she went to get the newspaper. Her voice broke on that sentence. She stopped. She looked down at her folder. She looked back up at Judge Caprio and she said, "I was not doing anything wrong. I was just burying my husband." The courtroom was silent. Judge Caprio did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the ticket. He looked at the timestamp. He said, "This ticket was written at 5:32 p.m. on the same day as the funeral?" And Margaret said, "Yes, sir." Judge Caprio looked up. The clerk looked at the judge's face. The court officer by the door looked at the judge's face. Something was happening in that room. Before we hear what Judge Caprio said next, I want to acknowledge something. There are people who watch these videos who are going through their own version of what Margaret went through. You are grieving something. You are carrying something heavy, and the world keeps sending you bills and tickets and demands like your pain does not count. This channel believes your pain counts. We believe that. If you subscribe right now, every single story we post is dedicated to people like you. People who deserve better. People who deserve to be seen. Subscribe and know that you are not alone in this. Victor Caldwell's lawyer stood up and made his argument. He said the parking citation was valid. He said the vehicle was parked for an extended time in a residential zone during restricted hours. He said the enforcement officer acted appropriately and within the law. He said his client had every right as a tax-paying resident to request enforcement of parking regulations. He said all of this in a very smooth voice without once acknowledging that the car belonged to a woman who had buried her husband that morning. Then Caldwell himself was asked to speak. He stood up slowly, adjusted his jacket, and said that he understood it was a difficult situation, but that the rules applied to everyone. He said he had nothing against Mrs. Dorsey personally. He said, "I have a property to maintain and a neighborhood standard to uphold. If we make exceptions for everyone who has a hard day, there is no point in having rules at all." He called it a hard day, a hard day. The clerk closed her eyes briefly. Two people in the gallery shook their heads. Margaret's daughter Denise, sitting in the second row, pressed her lips together so hard they went white. Judge Caprio looked at Victor Caldwell for a long moment. Then he looked down at his desk. Then he looked at Margaret, and something in Judge Frank Caprio's eyes changed. I need to tell you something about Judge Caprio that most people do not know. Judge Caprio lost his own father when he was a young man. He has spoken about it in interviews. His father was an immigrant from Italy, a hard-working man who believed in this country and believed in dignity. When his father died, Frank Caprio was still in school. He remembers the days right after the funeral. He remembers how the world kept moving even though his world had stopped. He remembers the mail that kept coming, the bills that kept arriving, the sense that nobody paused for a single second to acknowledge what his family had just lost. He has said that those weeks taught him something he never forgot. He said they taught him that the law without mercy is just a machine, and a machine does not belong in a courtroom. A human being belongs in a courtroom. When Judge Caprio looked at Margaret Ellen Dorsey, he was not just seeing a widow with a parking ticket. He was seeing every person who ever had to keep standing while the ground was gone from under their feet. He was seeing his own mother in her grief. He was seeing something true about what it means to be a person in this world. He said, "Mrs. Dorsey." His voice was different now, quieter. "Your husband sounds like a wonderful man." Margaret said, "He was the best man I ever knew." Judge Caprio nodded once. He put his hand flat on the desk. He looked at the ticket for a moment, and then he looked at Caldwell. He said, "I have heard enough." The courtroom held its breath. He said, "The citation against Mrs. Dorsey is dismissed in full immediately." He did not pause for applause. He kept talking. He said he was not finished. And here is where something happened that the people in that courtroom that day will never forget as long as they live. Judge Frank Caprio, who has presided over thousands of cases, who has seen every kind of human behavior this city can produce, took his glasses off and set them on his desk. He pressed two fingers against the bridge of his nose. His voice, when he spoke again, was thick with something he was clearly trying to hold back. He said, "I have been doing this job for a long time, and I am going to tell you something. There are moments in this courtroom that stay with you forever." He stopped. He looked at Margaret. He said, "Mrs. Dorsey, I am so sorry for your loss. I am genuinely sorry." Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. A woman in the gallery started crying quietly. Denise leaned forward with her hands folded. If you are watching this right now and your heart is in your throat, you are not alone. Thousands of people have watched this moment and felt the same thing. Every single one of them subscribed to this channel because they wanted to keep feeling this. They wanted to keep being reminded that there is still goodness in this world, that there are still people in positions of power who use that power the right way. Join them. Subscribe right now. We need you in this community. This is what we are here for. Judge Caprio put his glasses back on. He turned to Victor Caldwell, and he spoke slowly and clearly and without any anger in his voice, which somehow made it more powerful than anger would have been. He said, "Mr. Caldwell, I am ordering you to pay a civil community fine of $3,000 to the Providence Hospice and Palliative Care Fund. This is an organization that serves families going through exactly what Mrs. Dorsey and her husband went through. This money will go directly to helping people in their final days receive dignity and comfort. You will make this payment within 30 days, and you will provide proof of payment to this court." He said, "I am also ordering you to complete 40 hours of community service at the St. Michael's Community Grief Center on Atwells Avenue. You will serve those hours over the next 90 days. You will arrive on time. You will work. You will sit with people who are grieving. You will listen to them, because clearly, Mr. Caldwell, listening is something you need to practice." Judge Caprio paused. The courtroom was absolutely still. Then he said, "And there is one more thing. I am ordering you to write a personal letter of apology to Mrs. Margaret Ellen Dorsey, not through your lawyer, not a form letter, a personal letter in your own handwriting signed by you, delivered to this court within 14 days. In that letter, you will acknowledge what you did on September 13th. You will acknowledge that you called parking enforcement on a woman who was burying her husband. You will say those words out loud in writing, and you will mean them. This court will review that letter before it is forwarded to Mrs. Dorsey, and if this court determines it is not sincere, you will rewrite it until it is." The room exhaled. People looked at each other. Then Judge Caprio turned away from Caldwell entirely and spoke only to Margaret. He said, "Mrs. Dorsey, what your husband did for 31 years on that school bus matters. It matters more than any parking regulation has ever mattered or ever will. He knew those children's names. He remembered their birthdays. Do you understand what that says about a man? That is a man who understood that other people are real. That is a man who understood that his small actions had weight. That is the opposite of what we saw today from the other side of this courtroom." He said, "Go home. Be with your family. Your husband was a good man, and you were loved by a good man, and that is more than most people ever get. I am sorry the law intruded on your grief. It should not have. I am sorry." Margaret Dorsey stood at that podium for a moment. She looked at Judge Caprio. Then she said very quietly, "Thank you. He would have liked you." Judge Caprio smiled, just for a second. Then he looked back down at his desk and the clerk called the next case. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Margaret's daughter, Denise, wrapped her arms around her mother and they both cried. Several people from the gallery came out and shook Margaret's hand without saying a single word. One older man in a brown jacket just nodded at her. That was enough. Victor Caldwell walked out quickly with his lawyer close behind him, their shoes loud on the marble floor. He did not look at Margaret. He did not look at anyone. Victor Caldwell's lawyer filed a motion to reduce the community fine 2 weeks later. The motion was reviewed by the appellate division and denied within 10 days. The ruling was upheld without comment. Every penalty stood exactly as Judge Caprio had ordered it. Caldwell paid the $3,000 to the Providence Hospice and Palliative Care Fund on the 28th day, 2 days before the deadline. He showed up at the St. Michael's Grief Center the following Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. The director of the center said later that he sat in the corner during the first session and did not speak. The second week, he handed a box of tissues to a woman who was crying. The third week, he stayed 20 minutes after his required time was up. He did not explain why. He just stayed. The handwritten letter arrived at the court on the 11th day. The clerk read it before it was forwarded. She told a colleague later that it was 2 pages long and that it referenced specific things about Robert Dorsey that Caldwell had apparently researched. He mentioned the school bus. He mentioned the birthday notebook. He said he had not known about any of it. He said he was ashamed. Margaret received the letter on a Tuesday afternoon. Denise was with her when she read it. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the same drawer as Robert's birthday notebook. She has never spoken publicly about what was in the letter. She said once that it said what it needed to say, and that was enough. Margaret still works at the grocery store on Broad Street. She still wears the white sneakers. Her daughter got her a new pair for Christmas, and she thanked her warmly and then kept wearing the taped ones for another 3 months because they still had some life in them. She has a framed photograph on the counter above the kitchen sink now. It is her and Robert at their daughter's wedding. She says good morning to it every day. Now I want to say something directly to you. To anyone watching this who has ever lost someone and felt the world move on like your loss did not matter, I want you to know something. You matter. Your grief matters. The person you are grieving matters. Their name matters. Their birthday notebook matters. Their 31 years on that school bus matters. You are not invisible just because the world keeps sending you bills and tickets and deadlines. Your loss is real. Your love was real. Do not let anyone ever make you feel like it was a hard day. It was not a hard day. It was the hardest day. And you survived it. That is something. And to anyone watching this who has Victor Caldwell's kind of privilege, I am asking you to do one thing. Pause. Before you make the phone call, before you write the letter, before you look at the car parked in front of your house and reach for your phone, pause and ask yourself what might be happening inside that house. Remember that the rules we make are supposed to serve human beings, not punish them. Remember that on your worst day, on the day you are most broken, you will want someone to pause too. Use your privilege to give people room to breathe. That is the only use of privilege that actually matters. I think about this case often. I think about Margaret standing at that podium in her navy blue coat with the little photograph pinned to her lapel. I think about how she shook when she walked in and how steady she was when she walked out. I think about Robert's birthday notebook with over 200 names in it. I think about what it means to move through this world the way Robert Dorsey moved through it, quietly, consistently, remembering that other people exist and that their days matter. I think about what Judge Caprio said, that the law without mercy is just a machine, and I think about what it would mean if every person in every position of power in this country understood that, what kind of world we would live in. This case is not just about a parking ticket. It is about whether grief gets to be real in public. It is about whether a widow in worn sneakers gets to be treated as a full human being by a system that could very easily reduce her to a case number. It is about whether money and property and neighborhood standards ever get to outweigh the fact that a man died and a woman loved him, and she was doing the sacred, exhausting, heartbreaking work of saying goodbye. Judge Caprio answered that question. He answered it by looking at Margaret Dorsey and saying, "I see you. I am sorry. Your husband was a good man." That is justice, not perfectly, not in a grand sweeping way, but in the only way that actually reaches people. One person at a time, one courtroom, one terrible Tuesday, one woman in a navy blue coat, one judge who took his glasses off. Before this video ends, I need to ask you directly. There are millions of people who never hear stories like Margaret's, stories where the system actually works, stories where someone in a black robe looks at a grieving woman and chooses mercy over procedure. They do not hear these stories because no one is telling them. This channel tells them every week. Every single week we find a new Margaret, a new Robert, a new judge who gets it right, and we bring that story to you, but we can only keep doing it with you here. If you watch this entire video, you are the kind of person this channel was built for. You believe in something. You believe people deserve to be seen. Subscribe right now and make that belief count. Thank you for watching this entire story. Thank you for caring about Margaret Ellen Dorsey and Robert James Dorsey and the 31 years he spent knowing children's names and the 14 months she spent holding his hand through the worst thing imaginable. Thank you for being the kind of person who watches a video about a woman with an $85 parking ticket and feels it in your chest. Subscribe to this channel and join our family. We are building a community of people who believe that justice matters and that stories matter and that a widow in worn-out sneakers with a taped soul matters just as much as a man in a charcoal suit with a Rolex on his wrist. We are building a community that believes the law should serve people, not grind them up. That believes mercy is not weakness. That believes one judge's decision to take off his glasses and say, "I am sorry," can change something real in the world. We are building a community that believes Robert Dorsey's birthday notebook is more important than any parking ordinance ever written. We believe it. Every person who has ever subscribed to this channel believes it. Hundreds of thousands of people who have watched these stories believe it. Subscribe now and be part of something that matters. Not something loud, not something angry, something true, something steady, something that shows up every week and says, here is another story, here is another person, here is what happened when someone chose to do the right thing or did not, and here is what justice looks like when it finally arrives. Join us. Stand with us, fight with us for justice, for compassion, for humanity. Subscribe and let us build the world we want to live in together. Robert Dorsey knew over 200 children's birthdays by heart. Let us be the kind of people who are worth remembering like that.